Imagine this. It's your wedding day, the most important day of your life. But your father wants to bring along the woman who shattered your family, the woman who tore your parents apart, the woman who was once trusted like family. Do you let her in, risking the peace of your day, or do you close the door and face the storm that follows? This is my story. Asterisk, they say, the past never really dies. It doesn't vanish into smoke or dissolve into the air. It lingers. It stays with you like an echo, like a scar that doesn't ache every day but burns when you least expect it. And sometimes it shows up at the worst possible time, like your wedding day. But before I get there, before I tell you about the fight with my dad, before I tell you about the text message that ended it all, you have to understand where it started. You need to see the picture of my family as it once was before it all burned down. I was 12 years old when my world cracked open. But before then, I thought I had everything a kid could want. We weren't rich, not even close, but our house in New Jersey had a warmth to it. My mum loved hosting little Sunday dinners. She'd cook spaghetti or roast chicken, and my dad would stand over the grill when the weather was good, holding a beer and cracking jokes about his famous burgers. We laughed a lot. At least, that's what I remember. Laughter. My parents teased each other, and I thought it was playful. Looking back now, I wonder how much of that laughter was real and how much was just a mask. Kids don't see masks. We see what we want to see. We also had this tight little circle of family friends. You know, the kind of people who are over for barbecues, birthdays, Thanksgivings, the ones you call aunt or uncle even though you're not related. That's where she came in, the woman who would later ruin everything. She wasn't just some stranger my dad met at work or online. She was in our living room. She ate at our table. She laughed at my mum's jokes. She held me when I was little, tucked a blanket over me during movie nights. That's how deep she was in our lives. That's what makes it worse. When betrayal comes from inside the circle, it doesn't just break trust, it poisons the foundation. If I look back carefully, I can see the cracks before the collapse. Small things. My dad working late more often. My mom looking at the phone a little too long, her smile fading when she thought no one was watching. The arguments that started soft but grew louder, sharper, echoing up the stairs while I buried my head under a pillow. One night, I heard my mum crying in the kitchen. It was past midnight, and I crept down the stairs because the sound didn't feel right. She was sitting at the table, hands covering her face. The dim yellow light from the ceiling lamp made her look smaller, weaker than I'd ever seen her. My dad wasn't there. His car wasn't in the driveway. I remember thinking, where is he? Why isn't he here? But I was 12. I didn't have the language to name what I was feeling. I just knew something was wrong. The safe bubble of childhood was thinning, and soon it would burst. It happened on a Saturday afternoon. My dad was supposed to take me to a baseball game, but instead I heard shouting from the living room. I froze at the top of the stairs. I shouldn't have listened, but of course I did. Kids always do. My mum's voice cut through first. How could you? With her, with someone we trusted. And then my dad's voice, lower but defensive. It just happened. You don't understand. I didn't mean for it. I don't remember the exact words after that, because my ears started ringing. I only caught fragments. Betrayal, friend, how long, lies. And then I heard a name. Her name, the family friend who was practically an aunt to me. And suddenly, the world tilted. It wasn't a random stranger. It wasn't some nameless mistake. It was her. I remember gripping the railing so hard my knuckles turned white. My stomach dropped like I was on a roller coaster, except there was no thrill, only nausea. I wanted to throw up. I wanted to scream, but I did nothing. I stayed frozen, a kid caught in the crossfire of adult chaos. By the time the shouting ended, by the time I dared to move, my dad was gone. He didn't take me to the game. He didn't even look at me. I remember standing by the window, watching his car disappear down the street, and somehow knowing that nothing would ever be the same again. My mum came upstairs later. Her eyes were red, her face streaked with tears. She sat on the edge of my bed and tried to smile, but it cracked halfway. She said something like, "Daddy made a mistake. We're going to be okay." But I could hear the lie in her voice. I was 12, but I wasn't stupid. That night, I lay awake and stared at the ceiling. Every sound of the house, the creak of the pipes, the hum of the fridge felt louder, emptier. I wanted to believe my mum. I wanted to believe that we'd be okay. But deep down, I knew we weren't. The days that followed blurred together. Tense silences at breakfast. Phone calls behind closed doors. My mum avoiding eye contact. My dad acting like nothing had happened. He still joked, still grilled burgers, but it felt forced. The warmth was gone. Our house felt colder, like someone had left the door open in the middle of winter. And then that woman stopped by. She knocked on the door, and my mum answered. I can still see it. Mum's face hard as stone, Dad standing behind her, and me peeking from the staircase. The woman looked at me, and for the first time, I didn't feel safe around her. Her smile was too thin, too sharp, like she knew what she'd done but wasn't sorry. I hated her. I didn't even understand the full scope of why yet, but I hated her. And I hated my dad for letting her in, for letting her tear us apart. The final crack came a few weeks later. My mom sat me down in the kitchen. Her voice was steady, but her hands shook as she folded and unfolded a napkin. She said, "Your father and I, we can't stay together." I asked why, even though I already knew. She said words like differences and trust, but the truth was sitting heavy in the air. The truth was betrayal. The truth was her. I wanted to cry, but I didn't. I clenched my jaw and nodded, because I thought being strong would help my mum. But inside, I was crumbling. Inside, I felt like I was falling down a well with no bottom. When people talk about childhood, they talk about innocence, about summers that feel endless, about the comfort of knowing your parents are always there. But my childhood ended at 12. The moment I learned that even the people you trust the most can break you. And here's the thing, you don't just get over something like that. You carry it. It shapes you. It molds how you see love, loyalty, even family. It stays with you, like a shadow you can't outrun. I didn't know it then, but the shadow of that betrayal would follow me into adulthood, into my own relationships, and eventually into my wedding day. The weeks after the divorce announcement felt like walking through a minefield. Nothing was stable. Nothing was safe. Every step I took in that house felt like it could trigger another explosion. My mum tried to act strong, but I could see the weight pulling her down. My dad? Well, he slipped further and further away. He didn't disappear physically, not at first. He still lived in the house for a while, drifting through the rooms like a ghost, but he wasn't present. He was always on his phone, always stepping outside to take a call, always finding reasons not to sit down at the dinner table, And every time the phone rang, I wondered if it was her. The woman who had been a family friend suddenly became a stranger in my eyes. I couldn't even look at her picture without my chest tightening. She was still around, of course. She called my dad. Sometimes she came by. She had this brazen confidence that made my stomach twist. She acted like nothing had changed, like she hadn't just detonated a bomb in the middle of my family. I remember one afternoon, I came home from school and her car was parked in the driveway. My heart dropped. I stepped inside and there she was, standing in the kitchen, talking to my dad. My mum was nowhere to be seen. I froze, my backpack still slung over one shoulder. She turned to me, smiling like she always did, but now it felt hollow, toxic. She said, "Hey kiddo," as if we were still close, as if she hadn't betrayed the people I loved most. I didn't answer her. I dropped my backpack and ran upstairs, slamming my bedroom door behind me. I sat on the floor, my back against the door, listening to the muffled voices downstairs. I couldn't make out the words, but I didn't need to. I knew what was happening. My dad had chosen her, not us, not his family. Her. That was the moment I started building a wall. Not a physical one, but inside myself. A wall between me and my dad, between me and that woman, between me and trust itself. My mum rarely spoke about it. She tried to protect me, I think. She wanted me to have some semblance of childhood left, even though mine had been stolen early. She kept her anger buried, hidden behind polite words and forced smiles. But at night, I could hear her crying in her room. Sometimes I'd knock softly on her door, and she'd wipe her eyes quickly, telling me she was fine. I always nodded, even though we both knew it was a lie. There's something uniquely painful about seeing your mother broken. She was my rock, my safe place, the person who tucked me in and made everything better. But now she was crumbling, and I couldn't fix it. I was 12 years old, powerless against the storm tearing through our home. I felt like I had to grow up overnight. I started doing little things, washing dishes without being asked, checking on her, staying quiet when she looked tired. I thought maybe if I carried some of the weight, she wouldn't collapse completely. But deep down, I was angry. Not just at my dad and the woman, but at the universe for putting me in that position. Kids aren't supposed to patch up their parents. It's supposed to be the other way around. My father changed during those months. The man who used to laugh over the grill, who used to cheer at my baseball games, who used to ruffle my hair on the way out the door, that man faded. In his place was someone distracted, distant, defensive. Whenever I confronted him, even in small ways, he'd shut me down. One time I asked him, why her? Why did it have to be her? He froze, staring at me like I'd grown another head. Then he shook his head and said, "You wouldn't understand." That was it. No explanation, no apology, no attempt to bridge the gap. Just those words, sharp and dismissive. I walked away, my hands clenched into fists, my throat burning with words I wasn't brave enough to say. I wanted him to fight for us. I wanted him to prove he still loved us more than her. But every action told me otherwise. Every time he answered her call, every time he chose to be with her instead of us, the message was clear. She came first. The breaking point came on a Sunday. My mum had taken me to the park to get some fresh air. When we got back, my dad's car wasn't there. That wasn't unusual by then, but what was unusual was the note taped to the fridge. It was short, almost cold. "I'll be staying at Linda's for a while." "Don't wait up, Linda." That was her name. I hated how normal it sounded. Just a simple name for someone who had caused so much destruction. My mum tore the note down, crumpled it in her fist, and threw it in the trash without a word. I stood there in the kitchen, staring at the empty space where the note had been, and something inside me hardened. He wasn't coming back. Not really. Not in the way I needed him to. And I realized that my childhood, the version of my family I thought was unshakable, was over. The divorce happened quickly after that. Lawyers, papers, arguments I wasn't allowed to hear. Custody arrangements, weekend visits, awkward exchanges in parking lots. I hated every second of it. The tension clung to everything. Even Christmas felt like a chore, split between two houses. Two versions of family that never fit together the way they used to. Linda was always there, lurking in the background. She came to pick me up with my dad sometimes, sitting in the passenger seat like she belonged. I refused to look at her. I refused to speak to her. Once, she tried to hand me a soda from the front seat, and I pushed it back without a word. My dad scolded me, but I didn't care. She wasn't my family. She never would be. And yet, she stayed. Year after year, she stayed. Like a shadow, like a reminder that my family had been broken beyond repair. Looking back now, I realize I was mourning. Mourning a family that had died before I even had the words to describe it. Mourning a father I lost even though he was still alive. Mourning the trust that was stolen from me. I carried that grief into my teenage years. It colored everything, my friendships, my first crush, the way I looked at other people's families. Whenever I saw kids with parents who seemed happy, who laughed together, I felt a stab of envy. I wondered if they knew how lucky they were, because I knew what it felt like to have the ground pulled out from under you. To realize the people you love most are human, fallible, and capable of hurting you in ways you never thought possible. And that realization, it doesn't just go away. The years after the divorce blurred together in fragments. Some memories are crystal clear like scars carved into my brain, while others fade into fog, too painful to hold on to. But one thing is certain. The shadow of that betrayal never left me. I was 13 when I realized my life would never look like the movies or TV shows, where families sat down for dinner and laughed together. Those families felt like myths to me, like unicorns or superheroes' fantasy, not reality. At school, I didn't talk about it much. Everyone knew my parents were divorced, but nobody really knew the story. How could I explain it? How could I tell my friends that my dad had fallen in love with someone who used to eat dinner in our house, who used to hug my mum like a sister, who had been in family photos smiling right next to me? So I stayed quiet. I played the role of the normal kid as best I could, but inside I was carrying a storm. Weekends with my dad were the worst. I dreaded them. He would pick me up on Friday evenings. Sometimes Linda was there, sitting in the passenger seat, waving at me with that same smile I hated. I never waved back. I'd throw my bag in the back seat, climb in, and sink as far away from her as possible. The rides were always tense. My dad tried to make small talk asking about school, about my baseball games, about what movies I wanted to see, but it all felt forced, like he was reading from a script. And when Linda chimed in, it made my blood boil. I wanted to scream at her. "You don't get to ask me about my life. You stole it from me." At his apartment, things were even worse. Linda had moved in. of course. Her perfume was everywhere, her clothes in the closet, her photos on the walls. She decorated the place in soft colors and scented candles, trying to make it homey, but to me, it felt like an invasion. Every corner of that apartment reminded me of what I'd lost. I spent most weekends locked in the guest room, headphones on, pretending I didn't exist. Asterisk, back home. My mum was the opposite of all that chaos. She built a new kind of life for us, one held together with sheer determination. She worked longer hours, picked up extra shifts, did whatever it took to keep us afloat. But she never complained in front of me. If she cried, she did it alone. To me, she presented strength, and maybe that's what kept me from falling apart completely. She made our small house feel safe, even when it was just the two of us eating frozen dinners at the kitchen table. She asked about my day, listened to me rant, supported me in ways my dad no longer did. She became both parents at once, but I could see the exhaustion in her eyes. She carried pain she never spoke about. And sometimes, late at night, I'd hear her whisper prayers under her breath. Prayers for strength, for healing, maybe even for forgiveness. I wasn't ready to forgive. Not then, not for a long time. Asterisk, by the time I was 15, anger had become my closest companion. I lashed out at teachers, slammed doors, ignored my dad's calls. I didn't care about consequences. Nothing anyone could do to me compared to what had already been done. My mum worried, of course. She sat me down once, her voice soft but firm, and said, "Don't let their choices ruin your future." I nodded, but inside I wanted to scream. Their choices already ruined everything. I started hanging out with kids who felt just as broken as I did. We skipped classes, smoked behind the bleachers, blasted music that mirrored the rage in my chest. For a while, it felt good to numb myself, to drown out the pain with noise and rebellion. But deep down, I was still that 12-year-old boy, staring at the empty space on the fridge where my dad's note had been, realizing he wasn't coming back. Asterisk, one night, when I was 16, I finally snapped. My dad had come to one of my baseball games, something he hadn't done in years, and he brought Linda. They sat together in the bleachers, clapping, smiling, acting like they belonged there. After the game, I stormed over. My teammates were celebrating the win, but I didn't care. I looked straight at him and said, "Why are you here? You don't get to show up now, like everything's fine." He looked stunned, caught between guilt and defensiveness. Linda reached for my arm, but I jerked away. My voice shook as I shouted, "You ruined our family. You chose her over us. Don't act like you care now." The field went quiet. Parents stared. My dad's face turned pale. For a moment, I thought he might finally break, finally admit what he'd done. But instead, he said, "You don't understand. I love her." That was it. Those 4 words. I love her, like a knife twisting deeper. I walked away, my chest heaving, tears burning in my eyes. I didn't look back. Asterisk, after that night, something shifted. I stopped expecting anything from him. I didn't answer his calls, didn't go to his apartment, didn't even acknowledge Linda when she tried to play the stepmom role. I built my walls higher, stronger, impenetrable. He tried, sometimes. He'd send birthday gifts, texts, awkward attempts to reconnect. But it was too late. Every gesture felt hollow, like a band-aid over a bullet wound. I poured all my energy into leaving. College became my escape plan. I worked hard, applied to schools far away, anywhere that would let me start over without the shadow of Linda and my dad haunting me. And when the acceptance letter came, my mum cried tears of pride, while my dad just sent a text. "Congratulations, son. I'm proud of you." It felt like words from a stranger. Looking back, I realize I wasn't just angry at my dad. I was angry at the betrayal itself, the way it infected every part of my life, the way it stole my innocence. I was angry that someone who once felt like family could cause so much destruction and still walk around smiling like nothing happened. That anger became a part of me. It shaped me, hardened me, made me question everyone's motives. If my dad could betray us, if Linda could betray my mum, then anyone could betray anyone. Trust became a foreign language I no longer spoke. But anger is heavy, and carrying it for so long started to weigh me down. By the end of high school, I wasn't the same kid anymore. I was tougher, colder, more guarded. I had dreams of leaving it all behind, but I also carried the scars. Scars that whispered, no one is safe. No one is permanent. Everyone leaves. And those whispers would follow me into adulthood, into college, into relationships, into every corner of my life. Because betrayal doesn't end when the papers are signed. It lingers. It infects. It changes you in ways you can't always see until one day you look in the mirror and realize the person staring back isn't who you were meant to be. When I left New Jersey for California, I felt like I was running more than moving. People said college was a new chapter, a time of discovery, freedom, and becoming your own person. For me, it felt like exile, deliberate escape from the ruins of my family. I remember standing at the airport, suitcase in hand, my mother's eyes red from crying, but her smile steady. She hugged me so tightly I could barely breathe. "Go make a life for yourself," she whispered. "Don't let the past chain you here." Those words rang in my ears as the plane took off, the skyline shrinking beneath me. For the first time in my life, I was leaving behind not just my home, but the battlefield of my childhood. I didn't know what waited in California, but I knew it had to be better than what I was leaving. The first few weeks were exhilarating. Nobody knew me. Nobody knew about my dad's affair, or the divorce, or Linda. I could reinvent myself, build a version of me untouched by betrayal. I decorated my dorm room with posters of bands I liked, stocked my mini fridge with ramen and energy drinks, and told myself this was it, a fresh start. I threw myself into classes, late-night study sessions, and the intoxicating freedom of doing whatever I wanted, whenever I wanted. But freedom, I discovered, is a double-edged sword. It's thrilling, yes, but it's also lonely. There were nights when the silence in my dorm felt suffocating. Back home, even in chaos, there had been noise. My mum cooking, the hum of the TV, the muffled tension of arguments behind closed doors. Here, there was nothing. Just me, the glow of my laptop, and thoughts I couldn't shut off. Making friends was easy on the surface. I could be funny, laid back, the guy who joined beer pong games or late-night diner runs. But letting anyone in, that was different. Whenever conversations turned personal about families, childhoods, parents, I would steer them away. I'd say something vague like, "Yeah, my parents are divorced," and change the subject. Nobody pushed. In college, everyone is too busy figuring themselves out to dig into your past. But the truth was, I was terrified. terrified that if people knew the real story, they'd see me differently, that they'd pity me, or worse, judge me. And when it came to dating, the fear was even stronger. Asterisk, my first girlfriend in college was a girl named Sarah. She was sweet, with bright eyes and a laugh that filled the room. She liked me and that scared the hell out of me. At first, it was fun. We went to movies, shared late-night pizzas, stayed up talking until dawn. But the closer she got, the more I pulled away. She'd ask innocent questions about my family, and I'd shut down. She'd reach for my hand, and I'd flinch not because I didn't like her touch, but because intimacy felt dangerous. One night, after she asked me why I always seemed so distant, I snapped. "You wouldn't understand," I said. "It's complicated." Her face fell, and I hated myself for it. But I couldn't explain. How could I tell her that every time she said "I love you," I heard my dad's voice echoing those same words about Linda? That every tender moment reminded me of betrayal waiting just around the corner? The relationship fizzled after that, not because she didn't try, but because I wouldn't let her in. And Sarah wasn't the last. A pattern formed. I'd get close to someone, panic, then sabotage it before they could hurt me. It was easier to burn the bridge myself than wait for the flames to come from someone else. Asterisk, by sophomore year. I was good at wearing masks. To professors, I was the hard-working student. To friends, the sarcastic guy who never took life too seriously. To casual girlfriends, the charming but mysterious one. But inside, I was still that 12-year-old kid standing in the wreckage of his family, pretending everything was fine. I didn't realize it at the time, but I was building a fortress. Brick by brick, lie by lie, I was walling off the most vulnerable parts of myself. Nobody could get in, and I convinced myself I didn't need anyone to. Asterisk, even with the distance. My parents were never far from my mind. My mom called often, sometimes too often. She'd ask if I was eating enough, if I was making friends, if I needed money. Her voice was my anchor, the reminder that no matter how far I ran, I still had one parent who would never abandon me. My dad called too, though less frequently. Those calls were awkward, stilted. He'd ask about my classes, my grades, my future plans. He wanted to sound like a father, but the weight of everything unsaid hung between us. Sometimes Linda's voice would pop up in the background, cheerful, calling his name. Every time I heard it, my stomach twisted. I never asked about her, never acknowledged her existence, but she was always there, a shadow in the corner of our conversations. One night, after hanging up, I stared at my phone for a long time. I wondered if he ever felt the weight of what he'd done, or if he'd convinced himself it was all worth it. Did he lie awake thinking about the family he destroyed, or had he buried it as neatly as he'd buried his vows? Asterisk, junior year, something shifted. I took a philosophy class, one of those electives everyone jokes about, saying it won't matter in real life. But it mattered to me. The professor, a wiry old man with wild hair, once said, "The past is a prison only if you keep holding the keys." It hit me like a punch to the chest. Was I holding the keys? Was I the one locking myself inside my anger, my mistrust, my fear? I started journaling, writing down the things I'd never said out loud. I wrote letters to my dad I never sent, pouring out the rage and disappointment. I wrote about Linda, about my mum, about the kid I used to be. For the first time, I confronted the truth. I was tired of being angry, but knowing it and changing it were two very different things. Asterisk, despite everything, there were moments of light. Nights when friends dragged me out to concerts, where I lost myself in the music. Days when I hiked the California hills, the sun on my face, the horizon stretching wide open. And then there was Emily. She wasn't like the others. She didn't push me to open up, but she also didn't let me hide. With her, silence wasn't awkward, it was comforting. She had a way of looking at me, steady and unafraid, like she saw past the walls and didn't mind the cracks. I didn't know it then, but meeting her would change everything. Asterisk, college didn't erase my past, but it gave me space to breathe, to experiment, to fail, and to try again. It was where I learned that freedom is both exhilarating and terrifying. That trust is a muscle, one I hadn't exercised in years, and that maybe, just maybe, my life didn't have to be defined by betrayal. I was still carrying the scars, yes, but for the first time, I saw the possibility of something more. A life built not in the shadow of what was broken, but in the light of what could be healed. And that possibility came in the form of a girl named Emily. Asterisk. When I left New Jersey for California, I felt like I was running more than moving. People said college was a new chapter, a time of discovery, freedom, and becoming your own person. For me, it felt like exile, deliberate escape from the ruins of my family. I remember standing at the airport, suitcase in hand, my mother's eyes red from crying but her smile steady. She hugged me so tightly I could barely breathe. "Go make a life for yourself," she whispered. "Don't let the past chain you here." Those words rang in my ears as the plane took off, the skyline shrinking beneath me. For the first time in my life, I was leaving behind not just my home, but the battlefield of my childhood. I didn't know what waited in California, but I knew it had to be better than what I was leaving. Asterisk, the first few weeks were exhilarating. Nobody knew me. Nobody knew about my dad's affair, or the divorce, or Linda. I could reinvent myself, build a version of me untouched by betrayal. I decorated my dorm room with posters of bands I liked, stocked my mini fridge with ramen and energy drinks, and told myself this was it, a fresh start. I threw myself into classes, late-night study sessions, and the intoxicating freedom of doing whatever I wanted, whenever I wanted. But freedom, I discovered, is a double-edged sword. It's thrilling, yes, but it's also lonely. There were nights when the silence in my dorm felt suffocating. Back home, even in chaos, there had been noise. My mum cooking, the hum of the TV, the muffled tension of arguments behind closed doors. Here, there was nothing. Just me, the glow of my laptop, and thoughts I couldn't shut off. Asterisk, making friends was easy on the surface. I could be funny, laid back, the guy who joined beer pong games or late-night diner runs. But letting anyone in, that was different. Whenever conversations turned personal about families, childhoods, parents, I would steer them away. I'd say something vague like, "Yeah, my parents are divorced," and change the subject. Nobody pushed. In college, everyone is too busy figuring themselves out to dig into your past. But the truth was, I was terrified. Terrified that if people knew the real story, they'd see me differently. That they'd pity me, or worse, judge me. And when it came to dating, the fear was even stronger. Asterisk, my first girlfriend in college was a girl named Sarah. She was sweet, with bright eyes and a laugh that filled the room. She liked me, really, liked me, and that scared the hell out of me. At first, it was fun. We went to movies, shared late-night pizzas, stayed up talking until dawn. But the closer she got, the more I pulled away. She'd ask innocent questions about my family, and I'd shut down. She'd reach for my hand, and I'd flinch, not because I didn't like her touch, but because intimacy felt dangerous. One night, after she asked me why I always seemed so distant, I snapped. "You wouldn't understand," I said. "It's complicated." Her face fell, and I hated myself for it. But I couldn't explain. How could I tell her that every time she said, "I love you," I heard my dad's voice echoing those same words about Linda? That every tender moment reminded me of betrayal waiting just around the corner. The relationship fizzled after that. Not because she didn't try, but because I wouldn't let her in. And Sarah wasn't the last. A pattern formed. I'd get close to someone, panic, then sabotage it before they could hurt me. It was easier to burn the bridge myself than wait for the flames to come from someone else. Asterisk, by sophomore year. I was good at wearing masks. To professors, I was the hard-working student. To friends, the sarcastic guy who never took life too seriously. To casual girlfriends, the charming but mysterious one. But inside, I was still that 12-year-old kid standing in the wreckage of his family, pretending everything was fine. I didn't realize it at the time, but I was building a fortress. Brick by brick, lie by lie, I was walling off the most vulnerable parts of myself. Nobody could get in, and I convinced myself I didn't need anyone to. Asterisk, even with the distance. My parents were never far from my mind. My mom called often, sometimes too often. She'd ask if I was eating enough, if I was making friends, if I needed money. Her voice was my anchor, the reminder that no matter how far I ran, I still had one parent who would never abandon me. My dad called too, though less frequently. Those calls were awkward, stilted. He'd ask about my classes, my grades, my future plans. He wanted to sound like a father, but the weight of everything unsaid hung between us. Sometimes Linda's voice would pop up in the background, cheerful, calling his name. Every time I heard it, my stomach twisted. I never asked about her, never acknowledged her existence, but she was always there, a shadow in the corner of our conversations. One night, after hanging up, I stared at my phone for a long time. I wondered if he ever felt the weight of what he'd done, or if he'd convinced himself it was all worth it. Did he lie awake thinking about the family he destroyed, or had he buried it as neatly as he'd buried his vows? Asterisk junior year, something shifted. I took a philosophy class, one of those electives everyone jokes about, saying it won't matter in real life. But it mattered to me. The professor, a wiry old man with wild hair, once said, "The past is a prison only if you keep holding the keys." It hit me like a punch to the chest. Was I holding the keys? Was I the one locking myself inside my anger, my mistrust, my fear? I started journaling, writing down the things I'd never said out loud. I wrote letters to my dad I never sent, pouring out the rage and disappointment. I wrote about Linda, about my mum, about the kid I used to be. For the first time, I confronted the truth. I was tired of being angry, but knowing it and changing it were two very different things. Asterisk, despite everything, there were moments of light. Nights when friends dragged me out to concerts, where I lost myself in the music. Days when I hiked the California hills, the sun on my face, the horizon stretching wide open. And then there was Emily. She wasn't like the others. She didn't push me to open up, but she also didn't let me hide. With her, silence wasn't awkward, it was comforting. She had a way of looking at me, steady and unafraid, like she saw past the walls and didn't mind the cracks. I didn't know it then, but meeting her would change everything. College didn't erase my past, but it gave me space to breathe, to experiment, to fail, and to try again. It was where I learned that freedom is both exhilarating and terrifying. That trust is a muscle, one I hadn't exercised in years. And that maybe, just maybe, my life didn't have to be defined by betrayal. I was still carrying the scars, yes, but for the first time, I saw the possibility of something more. A life built not in the shadow of what was broken, but in the light of what could be healed. And that possibility came in the form of a girl named Emily. By the time Emma and I had been together for a couple of years, the landscape of my family life had shifted again. My mother had moved on, in the truest sense of the word. She wasn't just surviving anymore, she was living. The man who helped her rediscover that life was named Daniel. He wasn't flashy or overly charming. He didn't try to win anyone over. He was steady, kind, and consistent. The kind of man who fixed a leaky faucet without being asked. Who called to check in if you sounded tired on the phone. Who, when my mum laughed, looked at her like the sound was a gift. At first, I was cautious. I had grown up watching trust shatter, so it wasn't easy for me to accept anyone new in a family role. But Daniel didn't demand anything from me. He didn't try to be a replacement father, didn't push his way into my life. He was simply there, in the background, showing up for my mum in all the ways my dad hadn't. Over time, I began to trust him. He showed up at every holiday, every birthday, every family gathering. When I called my mum and she was too busy laughing in the kitchen with him to hear the phone ring, something inside me softened. She deserved that kind of happiness. We all did. I'll never forget the day he helped me move apartments. I hadn't asked him to. Honestly, I hadn't even considered it. But there he was, early on a Saturday morning, in work boots and a baseball cap, hauling boxes down the stairs without a word of complaint. At one point, I caught myself watching him, and the thought slipped in before I could stop it. This is what a dad is supposed to look like. It was a bittersweet realization, because while my relationship with Daniel grew warmer, my relationship with my father grew colder. Dad was still with Linda. 14 years had passed since the affair, since the divorce, since the lies blew our family apart. But for me, the wound was never truly closed. Linda wasn't just another woman. She was the embodiment of betrayal. A family friend who had smiled in my mom's kitchen, eaten dinner at our table, and then stolen everything we had. I couldn't separate her from the collapse of my childhood, and I couldn't forgive my father for tethering himself to her. Even after all this time, he tried, occasionally, to bridge the gap. A phone call here, a text there, but it always felt strained, as if we were both skirting around a minefield that could explode with one wrong word. I wanted to love him. He was still my dad. But every time I thought of Linda, every time I imagined her face at family milestones, something inside me hardened. I tried not to think about it too much. California gave me distance. Emma gave me peace. And Daniel gave me hope that broken families could still rebuild, in their own way. But peace has a way of being temporary in my life, because no matter how far I ran, the past had a habit of catching up. The night I proposed to Emma was simple. No fireworks, no elaborate staging, no hidden photographers. Just the two of us, sitting on a quiet stretch of beach at sunset, watching the sky melt into shades of orange and pink. I had carried the ring in my pocket for weeks, waiting for the right moment. And that night, with the waves rolling in and Emma leaning against my shoulder, I knew there would never be a more perfect time. I asked. She said yes. It was the easiest question I'd ever asked, and the most important answer I'd ever heard. The months that followed were a blur of planning. We both agreed we didn't want anything big. No massive ballroom, no hundreds of guests we barely knew. Just a small courthouse ceremony, intimate and honest, with only immediate family there. At first it felt uncomplicated. A small wedding meant fewer decisions. But soon, the question of who to invite became heavier than any other part of the planning. Emma's family was simple parents, siblings, a few close relatives. They were overjoyed, supportive, easy to include. My side was more complicated. My mum, of course, would be there. And Daniel, I couldn't imagine him not being there. He had been part of my life for over a decade, showing up in ways that mattered. He was family, whether blood agreed or not. And then there was my dad, on paper. The answer was obvious. Of course he should be there. He was my father. But weddings have a way of forcing all the unspoken tensions into the light. Because where Dad went, Linda went. And the thought of her sitting in that room, watching me marry the woman I loved, was unbearable. It wasn't just the history. It was the present. Linda had never reached out to me, never congratulated me when Emma and I got engaged, never made even the smallest effort to be part of my life. She wasn't family. She was the wedge that had split us, and I wasn't going to let her into my wedding day. So Emma and I made the decision. My mum and Daniel would be invited. My dad would be invited. Linda would not. I thought it was fair. I thought it was reasonable. But fairness is a funny thing. What feels balanced to one person can feel like betrayal to another. When I called my dad to tell him, I tried to phrase it gently. I told him how small the ceremony would be, how much I wanted him there, but that Linda wasn't invited. The silence on the other end of the line stretched too long. Then his voice, sharp, wounded. So your mother's boyfriend gets to come, but the woman I've been with for over a decade doesn't. I tried to explain. I told him Daniel wasn't just a boyfriend, he was family to me. That Linda had never made an effort, that her presence would open old wounds on a day that was supposed to be about joy. But my dad didn't want explanations. God damn it, he snapped. And then the line went dead. I sat there, phone in my hand, heart pounding. I had known it wouldn't go well, but I hadn't expected the sheer finality of his anger. It was the moment I realized my wedding might not just be the beginning of a marriage. It might also be the end of whatever fragile thread still connected me to my father. Asterisk, the day after the call, I sat on my apartment couch, phone in hand, staring at the blank screen. My dad's words echoed in my mind, repeating themselves like a mantra I couldn't shake. So your mother's boyfriend gets to come, but the woman I've been with for over a decade doesn't. I wanted to pick up the phone and call him back. Part of me craved a reconciliation, some explanation that would soothe the tension, a reminder that he was still my father. But another part, the part that had grown strong over years of disappointment, told me to let it be. I didn't call. Instead, I wrote. I wrote long, rambling letters I would never send. I poured out everything, the hurt of the past, the confusion of the present, the love I still held for him despite everything. But writing didn't fix it. It never did. That night, my mum called. She asked if I had spoken to Dad again. No, I said. I think it's over. Do you want it to be over? She asked quietly. I didn't answer. How could I? The line between standing my ground and cutting off a parent is thinner than anyone ever tells you. 2 days later, the phone rang. It was him. My chest tightened as I answered. You're really doing this? He spat immediately. I'm just planning a small wedding, I said evenly, trying not to let anger creep in. No, you're punishing me. You're punishing me for what? For everything, Dad, I said. For the past 14 years. For the choices you made. For what Linda represents. I'm not punishing you. I'm protecting myself. He laughed, but it was bitter. Protecting yourself. From your own father. From me, yes, I said. From the hurt I don't want on my wedding day. From the person who chose betrayal over family. The silence that followed was heavy. I could hear his breathing, sharp and fast, through the line. And then, your mother's boyfriend is there, and I'm not. That's unbelievable. After everything I've done for you, you mean everything you failed to do, I interrupted. I wanted my wedding to be about love, not old wounds. Daniel has been a father figure for years. Linda hasn't. It's that simple. He slammed the phone down before I could respond. The line went dead. I sat there, the room quiet except for the hum of the heater. My heart was pounding. Part of me felt relief. Part of me felt shame. And part of me, the part that was still a little boy, just wanted my dad to say, I understand. I'm proud of you. But I knew that wasn't coming. Over the next few days, I wrestled with guilt. Friends told me I was right to set boundaries. Emma supported me completely. But I couldn't shake the image of my dad's face when he hung up. The hurt and disbelief twisting his features in my memory. I called my mum. Do you think I'm being too harsh? No, she said immediately. You're being sane. You're protecting your happiness. And your wedding is your day. Dad can be upset, but that doesn't mean he gets to dictate your choices. Her words helped, but they didn't erase the ache. I still loved my dad. I still wanted him there. I just didn't want him to come with anger in his chest and Linda at his side. A few days later, my phone buzzed. It was a text from him. Congrats. I won't be there. Wishing you all the best. I stared at it for a long time. No apology. No explanation. Just those few words. I felt a complex tangle of emotions. Relief, sadness, anger, grief, and strangely, a little freedom. Freedom from trying to force a relationship that couldn't exist the way I wanted it to. I told Emma. She held me, rubbing my back in quiet understanding. He's your father, she said softly, but he doesn't get to control your happiness. I knew she was right. But the truth was, letting go of the desire for my dad's approval wasn't easy. It never is. Sitting alone that night, I replayed the years in my mind. The lies, the betrayal, the loneliness, the moments I had wished for normalcy and didn't get it. I thought about Linda, about Daniel, about Emma, about my mother, about the child I once was, and I realized something. My wedding, this day, wasn't just about Emma and me. It was a statement that I could choose the family I wanted to honor, that I could protect my own happiness without feeling guilty, that I could acknowledge the past but not be chained to it. I wasn't rejecting my father. I was rejecting the toxicity that had shadowed every milestone in my life. I was reclaiming joy, And in doing so, I was finally stepping into adulthood, not the one my parents defined for me, but one I was building myself. Asterisk that night, I made peace with the fact that my dad wouldn't attend. I grieved for a parent-child bond that might never be whole. I grieved for the wedding day we'd never share in laughter together, and yet I also felt a sense of calm. I was surrounded by people who loved me for who I was, not for what I owed them. I was marrying a woman who had seen my cracks and chosen to stay. My mother was happy. Daniel was steady. Emma's family was welcoming. The storm of confrontation had passed. The tension had been laid bare, and I had survived. More than survived, I had chosen. For the first time, I understood. Sometimes love isn't about forgiveness or reconciliation. Sometimes it's about boundaries, clarity, and the courage to protect your own heart. And sometimes that's enough. Asterisk. The morning of the wedding, I woke up before my alarm. The sunlight spilled through the blinds, painting stripes across the floor. The air was crisp, and for the first time in weeks, I felt calm. But calm doesn't erase reality. Dad's absence weighed heavily on me. I had rehearsed reactions to every possible emotion that might arise. Anger, sadness, relief, but sitting there in my apartment, it all seemed smaller than I had imagined. And yet, it was undeniable. The seat at the courthouse meant for him would remain empty. I checked my phone. No messages beyond the text he had sent days ago. Congrats. I won't be there. Wishing you all the best. I couldn't tell if I was hurt, angry, or relieved. Maybe a little of all three. Maybe even a strange mix of gratitude, for clarity, for closure. Asterisk, the courthouse was small, nearly intimate. 12 chairs, sunlight spilling in through tall windows, the smell of polished wood and cold stone. Emma and I arrived hand in hand, our nerves masked by excitement. My mother sat in the front row, smiling. Daniel was beside her, a quiet pillar of support. They exchanged a look with me that said everything words couldn't. I caught Emma's eye. She squeezed my hand, and I felt the tension in my chest loosen. This day was ours. Not a shadow of betrayal, not a remnant of old grudges, could touch it. Asterisk, as the officiant spoke, I thought about the years that had led me here. The childhood fractured by lies, the betrayal that left scars I thought would never heal. The nights alone in dorm rooms, the hesitant steps toward trust with Emma, and the countless small moments with Daniel that showed me what family could look like when love and respect are present. I thought about my father, and the absence of his presence was palpable. It stung, yes, but it also clarified something profound. Family isn't always defined by blood. Sometimes it's defined by those who choose to show up in meaningful ways. I remembered the fear I had felt growing up, that love could only come with betrayal. And I realized, now, that love could exist without it. That the cycles of hurt could be broken. That I could write my own story. Asterisk, when it was our turn, I looked at Emma and let the words flow. I spoke not just of love, but of the journey that brought us together. I promise to stand by you, I said, voice steady even when the past whispers in our ears. I promise to build a life with you that is full of honesty, patience, and joy. I promise to let us be the family we choose to be. She smiled, tears brimming. And I promise to love you in all the ways that matter. Through all the storms and all the sunshine, every single day, we exchanged rings. Simple bands that represented everything beyond the ceremony. Trust, resilience, and the courage to love despite fear. Walking out of the courthouse. The sun warm on our faces, I felt a quiet exhilaration. The storm with my father had passed, and in its place, something steadier had emerged. Clarity. I had made a choice about who and what would be present in my life, and that choice was mine to make. I didn't feel guilt anymore. I didn't feel shame. I felt peace. I thought about how years of betrayal had shaped me. And yet, I also thought about how love must love. My mother's renewed happiness, Daniel's quiet constancy had reshaped me. Family, I realized, isn't always a place or a bloodline. Sometimes it's the people who choose to show up. Sometimes it's the hands that lift you when you're falling. And sometimes it's the courage to protect your heart while still being open to love. That day, as Emma and I walked hand in hand through the courthouse doors into the sunlight, I finally let go of the lingering shadows of the past. My father wasn't there. Linda wasn't there. But my life was full of love, connection, and the people who had proven themselves through action rather than history. I thought about my younger self, the kid standing in the wreckage of his family, unsure of trust or loyalty. I smiled softly, because that kid would have been proud. Proud that I had navigated the pain, chosen my own path, and embraced love without fear. The past will always be part of me, but it no longer defines me. And as Emma squeezed my hand, whispering, "We did it," I knew she was right. We had done it. Together, we had chosen joy. For the first time in a long time, I felt whole.